I am from a small rural community in Oklahoma, and I know several places like that where churches like ours that say that all are welcome are hard to find sometimes. And I have heard so many stories of folks who have found our community of faith because frankly, we were just available online. And they expected it to be kind of a spectator sport of they're sitting and they're consuming something that's happening, and they're really just kind of on the back row watching it happen. But because of the intention that you and others have created, they are included and welcomed and involved, and they feel that they are a part of our church community fully, completely.
Welcome to the More Than Sunday podcast. I'm your host, Rohini Drake, and in this season called What the Tech, we're exploring the intersection of faith and technology and reflecting on how we can retain our humanity in an increasingly digital world. In this episode, we're joined again by Reverend Jonah Overton and Reverend Nathan Webb as we discuss if we can actually create meaningful relationships online.
What relationships don't start shallow? I think that for that answer and for people that have that feeling, it's that they've never taken the next step to actually lean into a relationship. And so if all you're ever willing to do is start a conversation or post a comment or engage in like a parasocial surface level, then of course you're going to only discover really shallow relationships. But whenever you're willing to meet someone on the other side of the screen, rather than just seeing them as like, a digital picture of themselves, but no, this is like an actual human being. This is an actual embodied person receiving what I'm saying and offering back to me. That's how relationships work. And so it's really not about digital or physical or about the way that we do it. It's, are you taking this relationship seriously? That's how we get past shallow relationships. It doesn't matter the platform. It just matters that we're intentionally seeing the human being.
And I think that's such a good observation because I find that to be true in my own life that, there's some people that I can exist in space with, like physical space, and I don't feel like they know me and I don't feel like I know them. And that really just goes back to what intention have I put into that. And so it makes sense that that would be true for online. So I'm wondering what your experience or perspective is on, can these relationships online be real relationships?
I think they absolutely can be. And I like the way that he framed that of, what relationships don't start shallow. There's a growing depth as you get to know a person that takes time and it takes conversation. And to know a person is not something you do in a day. You build a relationship over time, and that deepens and that flourishes in a way that is real. So I think it can absolutely happen online. And I think there are ways that people connect and find, I think about people who live in rural settings who don't have someone like them in their community or who thinks like them, or they don't think they do. And they find an online community where I think about a woman who lives in West Texas who worships with us, and she felt very lonely, and she has a family situation that she was basically told that her family was going to hell by her church, and she decided she didn't want to worship in that church anymore, and somehow she found us. And the conversations I've had with her, there's a growing depth of that, as she's found a community here online that ministers to her soul, and I think that's very real, and I think it's growing.
Yeah, I think something we have to ask ourselves is, am I willing to experience the cost of having real relationship? Because real relationships will cost us. It requires vulnerability for us. It requires us to know the whole person on the other side of the relationship. So I am married to someone with whom I disagree constantly. We think very differently on a lot of different things. And that costs me and him patience and grace and understanding and peace. And those are things that we have to genuinely work towards. And our marriage and friendship is enriched because of that. But it's not a casual, comfortable thing all the time. The lifelong friendships that I have had will inevitably cost me things, whether it's putting up with something because I love the person, even if I disagree with what they think or what they do in their life. And I think that the danger of online is that it can be really easy to not see people as a whole person, but to see them as the summation of their opinions they've shared, or the pictures they've posted, or any of those things. And so we have to be willing to see them as a whole human being with nuance. Now, and I'm going to give a real hot take here, so hope you're ready for this. Something that is not capable of nuance, in my opinion, is generative AI. I get deeply concerned when I hear that folks are turning to generative AI as their therapists or as their pastors, because I can tell you that generative AI does not actually care about you as a human being. It's a tool that can make us more effective and more efficient in some ways and is helpful in some ways, and it is not a human being. And God had an array of options as far as how God could show up to us in person in this world. And God chose to be a human being, a whole person incarnate in Christ. And I think that tells us that human relationships have a unique and important beauty, and they're going to cost us something, and they're not going to be perfect. And the person on the other end of that relationship is not always going to meet our expectations or our hopes or our wants or our dreams. And there is beauty in that. And it helps us to be, the churchy word we use is sanctified. We are sanctified when we are in community together. And one of the examples that I have is I'm part of a Buy Nothing group, and it's one of my favorite things. So the idea of this is be good to the environment and get to know your neighbors, and it's based in zip code, and so people will offer up things that they have that they want to share with the community. But the other important thing, I think, is that people also provide needs that they have that can be answered by the community. And that sometimes that's now in a Buy Nothing group, and you're saying, hey, does anybody have an extra, white t-shirt because my kid has a Halloween costume, right? It doesn't feel like that costs something of us. But the idea is there is offering up what we have and offering up what we need. And that's a hard thing to do sometimes, but that's what real relationship is. And so as long as we're willing to do that, yeah, you can find real relationship anywhere.
And I think for me, the observation I've made is that throughout my whole life, probably up until the pandemic, my only experience in building relationships was in person. Like, I knew how to feel somebody's energy and walk into a room or be vulnerable and say hi to somebody for the first time. And then that shift of like, well, can this translate to online spaces? I didn't know that it could until I tried it or until I practiced it. And I'm sure people do and maybe have a negative experience by having very shallow relationships. So they may toss it out the window and say, it can't happen online. But in my experience, kind of what you mentioned, Allison, getting to those vulnerable spaces with people, whether it's in person, but having that online has been one of the biggest blessings I've had in my life, of meeting new friends and new communities that accept me, embrace me, and give to me, but in the same way create a space for me to give of myself to them. And to me, that's very reflective of what I experience in person, and translating that to those online spaces has been a learning in the past few years of, oh, it really can happen in healthy, positive ways. But I do think like something that has been most helpful in those spaces is that those spaces have felt safe. Spaces that I could be in that didn't feel like they were going to harm me. And it's a question that I asked to my friend Jonah about kind of what their experience in ministry has been, and these kind of, how do you make these places feel safe, or what are people finding in these spaces, or how do they act in these spaces? And so this is what Jonah had to say.
The different space that virtual conversation and connection affords allows people to draw on the safety of their own environment. So if somebody has been really alienated from church before and traumatized by church before, walking in physically to a church building, sitting your body in a pew and subjecting yourself to whatever's going to happen may not be very safe. But engaging from the safety of your own home with the comfort and support of your pet and your favorite, beverage in a coffee mug through a screen that allows you to sort of titrate and engage to the best of your ability gives people a sense of agency over their vulnerability that allows them to choose to be vulnerable in a way that is maybe demanded in other more traditional spaces. And I think that agency gives people an ability then to become more authentically vulnerable, especially over time. So one of the things that's been really beautiful is seeing people who have sort of lurked in our virtual spaces for a long time suddenly announce themselves and then become more involved, and then become very involved and deeply engaged.
I really like what Jonah said about that, because you think about how much courage does it take to walk into a church. For some people, that's not a big deal. But if you've been hurt by religion and you've been hurt by a church, you've had a bad experience, and there are a lot of people out there that have. To walk into a church, the physical act of setting foot in the church can create real anxiety in people. And I had a family that joined our church recently, and they told me that they had, their words, she used the word
Lurked.
The word that they used was stalked. They stalked us for a couple of years. They'd been hurt by a church. They had heard about us. They checked us out for a couple of years. They came, and on their second visit, they joined, which is really unusual, second in-person visit. But we had no record of them before that because they were online virtual. Very unusual to join your second Sunday. The more typical thing is someone comes and they visit for a few months, 6 months or 9 months, and then they join the church. In this case, they'd been worshiping with us online, and we didn't know it. And the thing they said, it was really stood out. You seemed like you were the real thing. This church was the real thing, but we had to come and see for ourselves. And you are. What we saw online is what we see in person, and the welcome we felt online is what we feel in person. The authenticity of the people here, what we saw online is what we see in person. And I thought that was such a beautiful expression. But they wouldn't have walked in the door of the church. They needed a safe way to stalk us.
I love those stories. I could listen to those stories all day. I wonder, Allison, if you've heard from anybody that has been created these really relationships, or maybe whether they lead to them coming to check us out in person, or they've just found that community that they've been looking for in the online spaces.
I've heard it from our online team. And I think one of the big things is that we treat our online congregation as fully part of our church. And you and Mallory and several others on our staff are so good about ensuring that just because they're not present in person, we remember that they are fully a part of our church community. And I am from a small rural community in Oklahoma, and I know several places like that where churches like ours that say that all are welcome are hard to find sometimes. And I have heard so many stories of folks who have found our community of faith because frankly, we were just available online. And they expected it to be kind of a spectator sport of they're sitting and they're consuming something that's happening, and they're really just kind of on the back row watching it happen. But because of the intention that you and others have created, they are included and welcomed and involved, and they feel that they are a part of our church community fully, completely. And we've had people who have joined who are officially members of our church community. They only worship online, and that's great. And we're so glad. And so I really think it's about asking what the goal of it is. So what is the goal of this community we're creating online? Is it simply to offer something for people to watch that they can like sing along with us in their homes? Or is it we are creating a community where there is give and take? And that's what the church has always been. The work of the church is done by the people, not the paid staff, mercenary pastors who stand up front. The work of the church is always done by the people. And so we're creating that same goal, that same idea online, and it's amazing.
Well, I think one of the cool parts about what FUMCR has done is that this didn't exist a few years ago. Like, this has been a growing process. This has been permission to try new things, to help build community, find what people are needing online and create space for them. So it's always been this kind of future thinking. Like, we're creating this for the people now, but we're also creating a thing for those who haven't interacted with us or haven't found their space yet. And so that really leads us into our next episode next week, where we talk about young people and like what are we doing with the technology available to us as a church, as people, to really be a help, to be the church for the next generation. So thank you so much for your time on this conversation. I'm looking forward to next week.
Thank you.
Thanks. Thanks again for joining us for this episode. If you want to learn more about the guests that we had on this episode, you can visit FUMCR.com/morethansunday. There you can also find any other episodes you may have missed. Thanks again for joining us. I hope you have a wonderful week.